I am here with Jason Thomas Gordon. Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Your book, The Singer's Talk, I've been spending a lot of time over the weekend with this book. And I have to say, I bought it on Kindle and I realized that's a mistake because I should have got it in print because this is just a wonderful resource book. Maybe tell us what was the initial idea for this book and how long did this project take you?
Well, the initial idea was kind of inspired by a chance meeting with Eddie Vedder in a bar in Toronto. And we ended up hanging out for like a half an hour at a bar and talking about music and everything else. And I'd been a drummer my whole life. And then I had become the singer for my band a few years before. I didn't want to be the singer. I kind of got forced into it by my guitar player and wanted to play in a band with him. So I kind of sold out and just did it. But I really consider myself a drummer and not a singer. So here I am with Eddie Vedder. We're talking. And at the end of the night, he leaves the bar and I go, oh, I just was hanging out with Eddie Vedder and I never even asked the guy how he's not blowing his voice out every night. You know, like advice I needed. And it got me thinking, why is it so hard to hear about the voice from singers? When you're a drummer, there's Modern Drummer. When you're, a guitar player has Guitar World. There's all these resources for every other instrument, but for the voice, there really isn't anything. So, or nothing I'd ever seen with like modern singers talking about the instrument of the voice. So it got me thinking, man, it'd be great to reach out to all my heroes and interview as many of them as I could and try to get some answers that I've always been looking for and things that could help us out on the road and in the studio and everywhere. So I just started lightly asking some family friends for help, and just seeing how it would be. And I got to interview Dionne Warwick and Tony Bennett right before he retired and Ozzy Osbourne and just people I knew. And then it turned into, wow, this could really work. I should really go like full on with this. And then I just went crazy and it took me about 7 years. And at about the 7-year mark, I said, I better stop and try to find a publisher. And because I'll just keep going. So I ended up, finding an incredible publisher in Permuted Press, and we released the book, and it's been incredible, man. It's just been really beautiful to see how it's all unfolded.
What I love is the list of singers that you interview. I mean, it's Ozzy Osbourne, you've got Springsteen, Steve Perry, Chrissie Hynde, Tom York, Paul Stanley. How did you assemble this list? Because it's really impressive, and I love that you found people that have very, very distinctive voices.
Yeah, well, I'm a music fan first and foremost, which is why you get into music, because you love it so much. And I'm not defined by one genre, even though I'm in a rock and roll band. I love every type of music. So, I had a giant list of all my favorite singers from every different genre, and then I tried to get them all. And it was really that simple. And I'd write emails, and people would say no, and I'd go back to them. I mean, it took, some people, half my book said no. And it took a few years to get them, like over time. And I'd build more and more people and go back and say, now look who I've interviewed. And each person would add more and more legitimacy. And it just was the labor of love. And I didn't have any kind of like clock bearing down on me or any kind of, publisher bearing down on me. I was just doing it on my own with no book deal and just believing in it. And it paid off. Thank God.
And I also love your questions. You have this wonderful format where you chose questions you were essentially going to ask everyone, and then you would move off from there. But I think the questions are fantastic. How did you come up with those questions?
The questions were really based on I wanted it to be a book where it was a resource guide for singers. So if a singer's on the road and they're having trouble and they're like, I'm starting to get sick, what do I do? Or what vocal warm-ups do you do before shows? Any kind of thing like that they could quickly turn to each singer as a resource guide. But then I also wanted it to be fun for music fans to read. I didn't want it to be a technical book where your eyes glaze over. So it's really I feel like it's a great combo of both. And so the original thing was, okay, what are the most pressing questions that I'll ask every singer? What are the immediate, most basic things that we want to know as singers? And so I just made a list of everything I really wanted to know as a singer. Are you warming down? Did you ever have vocal lessons? All that kind of stuff. And then fun stuff like what was your most embarrassing vocal mishap on stage? Things like that. And then from there, be specific to each singer, and that required me being a fan. And so if I'm talking to, Stevie Nicks and I want to ask her a question about one of my favorite songs, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to ask her about that song or her vocals on that song or whatever. Or I'm going to ask her, also fun things that are just bizarre to me that I don't think, she's ever been asked. Like, I asked her about if she's ever fallen over while she's twirling around on stage, and just like stupid things that I think are funny. So the book's really funny too, because you get all these really crazy stories and like hilarious neurotic answers because, let's face it, all singers are kind of neurotic at the end of the day. So
Yeah.
that was sort of the format. That's how I came upon the format.
No, and I love when you ask Michael McDonald about how he feels about all the people who imitate Michael McDonald.
Yeah, I asked him why he's everybody's favorite singer to impersonate, because he
Yeah,
is,
he is.
and so it's stuff like that that's funny. But all these singers gave such gems, as their answers, and really provided such insight, and they make you feel less alone at the end of the day.
What did you really come away with from all these interviews yourself as a singer? What have you really learned or even changed your mind about?
It's such a there's so many answers to that question, and there will continue to be, because the thing is that selfishly I wanted these answers, and now I have this book that I can keep finding all these new little tricks and strategies to use, or little pieces of advice. It's like it's going to keep on giving. This book it has so much in it that you can't just like learn it all in one sitting. So if you're out on the road, you're going to go, okay, what are the vocal warm-ups that work for me? Everybody gives you different ideas in the book. Or if you start getting sick, what do? Well, there's all these different types of remedies. So you almost need to like go through, and you'll find the things that work for you. But there's things that happened, or things I talk about. Like, for instance, Belinda Carlisle told me this incredible story about being in the studio with Brian Wilson. And Brian Wilson came in, and she wanted him to sing on one of her songs. And he came in and he had all his background vocals like on a tape recorder. And he went in and he started singing all the backing vocals. And they're sitting there in the booth going like, oh my God, this does not sound good at all. This is really weird. Like, what are we going to do? How do you tell one of the greatest icons of all time that it's not sounding good? And finally he's done. He's been singing all of his parts and everything. He comes back in the room, they press play all the parts together, and it's glorious. And all this stuff they thought was going to be awful, when it was all put together, just as Brian Wilson of all people would bring you, it sounds incredible. And so recently I'm in the studio with my guitar player, and we're recording a song, and he starts doing his backing vocals. And as he's singing his backing vocal tracks, I'm like, oh God, this isn't sounding great. And I remembered what Belinda said about Brian Wilson. So I did something I never do, which is I shut up. And sure enough, when everything was put together, it sounded awesome. And so I averted a band fight in the studio. And, I averted like unease with me and him getting into some weird argument, all the stuff that comes along, wasting money while you argue, all that stuff was averted because I remembered this story that Belinda said. So you're also learning things about, personality, or, how to disengage from an argument, all these different things that might be helpful that you don't even realize. I mean, in that moment, I thought of it. So there's a lot of lessons here.
There's one question in particular that I think people should really pay attention to. And you ask everyone how they found their sound. And it's quite fascinating, the process that each person went through to really find who they are as a singer. And as they continue to change, right, as the voice ages, etc., those that don't fight the voice, they realize, no, this is who I am. I think it was Robert Smith, whose voice I love. In your book talks about, no, I really want my voice to sound like I talk. And I just think that question is incredibly insightful.
Yeah, Robert was great about that. And he talks about when he didn't do that and how it's harder for him live when he didn't do that. But Paul Stanley talks about that a lot. A lot of these singers talk about that. One of my questions towards the end is what's changed the most about your voice since you started to now? And so, they have to confront their old selves and talk about, what they're learning now as their voice changes. And it's really important. And I think that's something that we're all gonna either we're all learning as we go along, or we're going to learn eventually if we keep doing it. So it's cool to kind of get this outlook from people and go like, well, yeah, I could try to scream my ass off every night, or I could, when I'm writing songs, approach it maybe a little bit differently. I have my eye on that more now. Like on our next record that we record, our new one's about to come out, and I'm still kind of doing it. I can tell that even from writing this book that my voice is better on the new record than it's ever been. But moving forward, I'm even going, I got to still take more of these lessons from this book. Like there is a growth, and you should be taking care of your voice and really like paying attention to the fact that you're going to be playing these songs for the rest of your life. And so try to write in a range that makes sense for you. Don't try to be Chris Cornell if you're not Chris Cornell. Those things are really important because you're going to end up doing more damage.
I think that's what really separates those singers, because so many of us, when we're learning an instrument or learning to sing, we have our heroes and we want to sound like our heroes, and we curse our voice if it's not like our heroes and try and force it. And so many of these great singers have their heroes, but they sat and went, okay, but who am I? And so That's why I love your question. The other theme I see, though, when you talk about health, there are two things that keep jumping out over and over, and everyone maybe has their different gargle that they'll use, etc. But almost every person talks about sleep and hydration.
Yeah, absolutely. It was cool to see kind of like where the meeting points were on a lot of the singers. And that was one of the places, even though everyone has their own little things within that they do, or different approaches, across the board, everybody's like, you better get sleep and you better drink a lot of water.
Absolutely. And then as you interviewed everyone, what are some of the answers that surprised you most?
There's so many, but the one that's coming to mind right now is how many of my heroes don't even really like their voice. That was one of the most shocking things, was hearing so many people talk about how they don't really love their voice, or they don't think that they're that great a singer. And it's like, what are you talking about? You're one of the greatest ever. And they don't look at it like that. That to me is fascinating. Because we're all just so in our heads. We're all so hard on ourselves. And, I felt a lot of freedom from this book. Like, God, man, give yourself a break. Look at what all your heroes are going through. We're all going through the same stuff. It doesn't matter how big you are. It doesn't matter how many people are in your audience every night. It's the same thing. It's the same struggle, And it's just fascinating that you can have one of the greatest voices on the planet and still have that self-doubt that creeps in, or stage fright, or whatever. Everyone's got their own thing they're bringing to the party, and it's kind of cool to get inside people's heads and see what they're about.
The other thing that's fascinating is when you ask about their influences and heroes, and there are certain names that popped up again and again. Mm-hmm. Pavarotti would pop up, a lot of Frank Sinatra, Ray Charles, Aretha. But then there were names where you're like, wait, what? Like Paul Stanley talking about UC Björling, right? The Swedish operatic tenor. And, I forget who it was. Someone talked about Jimmy Durante. And I'm like, yeah. Jimmy Durante.
Yeah, Brian Johnson.
Yeah. It's wild. And Jimmy Durante's phrasing, and you're going, that I never would have imagined that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you got John Lydon talking about Doris Day and Dolly Parton. I mean, it's incredible. And Speedy Gonzalez. I mean, it's amazing how all these things kind of like where the inspiration comes from. It's so wild to see.
The other thing I really appreciate and I find fascinating is these great singers who are no longer with us, Kurt Cobain, Tom Petty, Bowie, you went to very close collaborators and basically asked the same questions of them.
Yeah, just to hit back upon your last question for 2 seconds, I think the one person who gets mentioned across the board more than anyone is David Bowie, which is
Mm,
so fascinating because David Bowie, is one of the greatest, but he's not some sort of like Freddie Mercury, where it's like he's known for like his stratospheric voice or anything like that, but yet everyone mentions David Bowie in some way, shape, or form. It's really wild. But yeah, it was important to me. I wanted to be able to hear about what Prince did. How did Prince take care of his voice? What was Prince's approach, or any number of people, Nina Simone or Janis Joplin. And so the best way to do that was to find a band member or a producer that worked closely with them for years and ask them and try to get some insight from them. And I was really happy with a lot of those interviews, how those interviews turned out, because you really got to see something that we never would have been able to hear because these singers had passed away. So it was really nice to get the chance to do that.
and I also would have to think that a lot of these singers, because look, they've all done a lot of interviews, and there's not a one of them going, "Oh boy, another interview to do."
Right.
But you ask them questions that I don't think they've ever been asked, and do you find that really made them open up more? That you could really talk about things no one's ever bothered to ask them about?
Yeah, right now I'm sitting here doing some like light editing stuff I had to do for a potential podcast we're going to be doing with some of the audio, and it's been really wild to hear um, the kind of like off mic conversations that took place, that aren't in the book.
Hmm.
And I mean, across the board, they all are thanking me. They're all saying nobody ever asked me this stuff. And so it's really nice. It's really gratifying to know that I got to hit on this area that was so important to singers that they just weren't ever getting asked about. I still can't believe it. I still can't believe that this is the book that's doing that, because I was so shocked when I started doing this and I really needed help. I just couldn't believe there was nothing. I know there are for opera singers. I think opera
Hmm.
singers have a great book. But there just wasn't for like modern rock and roll singers, or R&B people or anything like that. I even have Chuck D in here talking about what it takes to rap and how to use your instrument, when you're rapping. And it's just so great to hear them all saying thank you and what did somebody else say, and like they're all geeking out on each other, like, what did Mavis Staples talk about and what did Tony Bennett say and stuff like that. It's really nice.
I think this is a must read. First of all, for singers, for music fans, but I think voice teachers and vocal coaches should read this and just see what singers get, the ones that do study with a vocal coach, what they want, and also why there are a number of singers who are really resistant to the idea of taking lessons.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. If it's a weird little stigma, I guess, in a way, which is strange. It shouldn't be. I think anything that works for you, you should do. Whatever works, do it. But there have been vocal coaches that have been receptive. I was taught by, when I first started, I went to someone named Emily Karlstrom, who's amazing and who I adore. And she really helped me. And she has the book, and she's got wonderful things to say about it. And Danny Formica, who you've had on your show.
Yep.
Um, Dan is one of the best vocal coaches out there, and he's had wonderful stuff to say, and was really digging the book. So it's not the book isn't something that should collide with a vocal coach. There's a lot of love for vocal coaches, and then there's a lot of get away from me's. But I think they work hand in hand. And yeah, I guess if a vocal coach could read it and be open and go, well, why do people feel a reticence in that way? What are they? Maybe they can lead with that when they have new students come to them or whatever. But the book is its own vocal lesson in a way by people that are out there on the road on a major scale. I mean, there's so many icons and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees in this book, and so it's its own little vocal lesson in a way. And you can go to that when you need, and then you can go to your vocal coach when you need. And so many people are calling their vocal coaches on the road that are in this book. So Ozzy Osbourne swears by a vocal coach. So whatever it takes, do it.
Yep. So Jason, where can people find the book?
Well, you can go to your local bookstore and ask for it there. You can go to Barnes and Noble, and if you live in Los Angeles, Book Soup, and I think there's a bunch of different bookstores. I think any bookstore you go to will order it for you. And if you want to just do it from your computer, there's always Amazon or Barnes and Noble online. It's available everywhere. We're doing good. With music books, we went to #1 Canada. We went to #3 in the UK. And for Amazon and in Barnes and Noble, we were just at #3. And so it's been pretty cool to see. It's been really awesome to see how people have really embraced it. And tons of the singers in the book have been posting about it and making a noise for us. So it's been rad.
That's great. Jason, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, man. And you can go to thesingerstalk.com at the end of the day if you need.
Perfect.